All right, you want to become a beekeeper, a couple of hives in the backyard, or maybe a quiet corner of a bigger property. You picture jars of golden honey lined up on a shelf, a name and a label with your own handwriting on it, maybe a little stand at the local farmer's market. It looks almost effortless from the outside. Bees do the actual work, right? You just check on them now and then, harvest what they've made, and the rest takes care of itself. That's the picture. That's what the cottagecore videos and the I quit my job to keep bees content sell you. But here's a question worth sitting with before you buy a single piece of equipment. If it were really that simple, why did American beekeepers lose an average of 40% of their colonies last year, and that was actually considered a good year? The year before that, it was 55%, more than half, gone. Not because those beekeepers were careless. Some of the hardest hit losses hit commercial operations run by people who've done this for decades. So, if experience alone doesn't protect you from that kind of loss, what does? That's the real question underneath the honey jars and the peaceful pasture footage. And it's the one this video is actually going to answer. Let's start with something more basic first. Why does this pull at people the way it does? It's not really about the bees, not at first. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself. Pollination, the food chain, a tiny ecosystem you get to steward. It's about the quiet of standing near a hive in the early morning, veil on, smoker in hand. Nothing demanding your attention but the low hum in front of you. For some people, it's genuinely spiritual. For others, it's simpler than that. It's one of the last hobbies left that gives you something real to hold at the end of it, a jar, a label, proof that you made something. So people start looking, they watch the videos, they price out a hive kit, they picture their own label on their own jar of honey. And almost everyone starts in exactly the same place, by imagining the honey, before they've even asked whether the bees are going to survive long enough to make any. So here's the real first question, and it's one almost nobody asks before they buy their first hive. Do you actually know why colonies are dying at this rate right now? Because if you don't know the answer, you're not ready to keep bees yet, you're just ready to buy some. The single biggest cause, across the US, Canada, and Australia alike, is a tiny parasite called the Varroa mite. It attaches itself to a bee, feeds on its body, and worse than the damage it does directly, it spreads viruses through the colony while it's doing it. In countries that have dealt with Varroa for decades, like the US and Canada, beekeepers have built entire management systems around it. Treatment schedules, resistant genetics, monitoring routines. But ask yourself this, what happens when a country that never had to deal with Varroa at all suddenly does? That's exactly what's happening in Australia right now, and it's one of the most dramatic beekeeping stories in the world today. Australia was one of the last Varroa-free countries on Earth, a genuine biosecurity success story for decades. Then in 2022, the mite was detected near a major port. Authorities threw everything at eradicating it, and by 2023 they had to admit defeat. Elimination was no longer achievable. Since then, it's spread to 5 states and territories. And here's the part that should genuinely worry anyone thinking about starting a hive today. The mite populations there have started developing resistance to the very treatments beekeepers used to control them. Pollination costs for crops like almonds have jumped from around $30 a hive to $200 a hive in just a few years. So if you're picturing this peaceful hobby, ask yourself, are you walking into the exact crisis the rest of the world has spent 20 years learning to manage? Except your country is just now starting from zero. Now, here's the biggest mistake almost every beginner makes, no matter which of these 3 countries they're in. They buy the bees before they understand any of this. It feels like progress. It feels like the moment the dream becomes real. Bees arrive in the mail or you pick up a nucleus colony from a local supplier, and suddenly you're a beekeeper. But what happens to a colony when its keeper doesn't know how to check for mites? What happens when winter comes and nobody taught you how to make sure the hive has enough stored honey to survive it? What happens when disease shows up and you don't recognize the signs until it's already spread? The real first question isn't which hive should I buy? It's, do I actually know how to keep something alive that depends completely on me noticing problems before they become fatal? So before the bees, there's a decision that shapes everything else. Are you doing this as a backyard hobby? Or are you actually trying to build something closer to a small business? Because those are 2 very different commitments wearing the same veil and gloves. A hobbyist with 1 or 2 hives is managing a small forgiving project. Some loss is expected. Some years are better than others. and nobody's depending on the honey check to pay rent. Someone trying to build a real income stream is signing up for something much closer to livestock farming, scaling colonies, managing genetics, treating disease proactively instead of reactively, and absorbing real financial risk when a season goes wrong. Ask yourself honestly, which one are you actually picturing when you imagine this life? Because the answer changes almost everything about how much you need to spend and how much you need to know before you start. Let's talk about what it actually costs to get started, because this is where most beginners badly underestimate the real number. A single hive starter setup, the box itself, protective gear, a smoker, basic tools, and your first package of bees typically runs somewhere between $500 and $850. That sounds manageable? But here's a question worth asking before you commit to just one hive. What happens if that single colony doesn't make it through its first winter? You're not just out the money, you're starting completely over with no comparison point to tell you what went wrong. This is exactly why almost every experienced beekeeper tells beginners the same thing. Start with 2 hives, not 1. 2 hives lets you compare. If one looks weak and the other looks strong, you actually have information. 1 hive alone just gives you a mystery. 2 hives typically runs closer to $900 to $1,300 for your first year, and that's before you factor in what almost nobody budgets for: ongoing costs that show up whether your colonies thrive or struggle. Varroa mite treatments alone can run $20 to $40 per treatment round, and you're not treating once, you're treating on a schedule, multiple times a year, indefinitely, for as long as you keep bees. Colony replacement is another cost that catches people off guard. Even seasoned beekeepers build a second colony's worth of bees into their budget most years because losing a hive isn't a rare edge case. It's closer to the norm. A replacement package of bees runs another $150 to $200. So here's a serious question. If you're only budgeting for the box and the bees, what happens the year you also need mite treatments, a replacement colony, and a repair to woodenware that cracked over winter, all in the same season? Now, let's talk about the other side. The side that's supposed to make all of this worth it. A healthy, well-managed hive can produce somewhere around 50 pounds of honey in a good year. Wholesale honey prices average somewhere around $3 a pound, but here's where it gets interesting. If you sell direct to consumers instead of wholesale, at a farmer's market or straight off your porch, that same honey can sell for significantly more per pound. Do the math on 50 pounds sold directly to people who want local raw honey, and a single strong hive might bring in somewhere between $300 and $600 in a good year. Add pollination services if you're near agricultural land. Some beekeepers earn another $150 to $200 per hive, renting their bees out to farmers for a pollination season. Add beeswax, which sells for another few dollars a pound, and adds up across a season. None of these numbers make you rich. But here's the honest question. Against a startup cost of under $1,000 for 2 hives, is a few $100s a year in return actually a bad outcome? Or does it depend entirely on whether you're doing this for income or for something else? Because here's what the good year actually looks like, laid out plainly. 2 healthy hives, both surviving the winter, both producing around 50 pounds of honey each. Sold direct to consumers, that might bring in somewhere around $600 to $1,000 combined. Your annual costs, mite treatments, minor equipment and replacement, maybe a bit of supplemental feeding, might run you somewhere around $150 to $250 for the year. Net profit, somewhere in the range of $400 to $750 on top of your original investment. Not life-changing money, but a genuinely positive year. And for a lot of people, that's not even really the point. Now here's the bad year, and ask yourself honestly whether you've actually pictured this version before now. 1 hive collapses over winter, a loss that's more common than most beginners expect given loss rates hovering around 40% nationally in recent years. You didn't catch the mite load in time, or the colony simply didn't have enough stored honey to make it through the cold months. Now you're not earning honey revenue from that hive at all. You're spending money to replace it, roughly $150 to $200 for a new package, plus the labor and time to get it established again from scratch. Your surviving hive has a mediocre season because of unusual weather, and instead of 50 pounds of honey, you get 20. Your total revenue for the year might barely cover what you spent replacing the lost colony. So here's the real question. Are you emotionally and financially prepared for that outcome to happen? Not as a rare disaster, but as something close to a coin flip in any given year. Let's talk about something that trips up almost every beginner researching this in North America or Australia. The rules aren't the same everywhere, and assuming they are can get you in real trouble. In the United States, regulation is a patchwork. Some states and cities require almost nothing. Others require registration or permits, and it genuinely depends on exactly where you live. In Canada, it's much more consistent and much more serious. Registration with your provincial apiculturist is mandatory, not optional, under laws like Alberta's Bee Act or Ontario's Bees Act, and failing to register isn't just a technicality. It's how provinces track and respond to disease outbreaks that could wipe out an entire region's colonies. In Australia, it's even stricter. Registration is compulsory in every state, even for a hobbyist with a single backyard hive, and inspectors in some states now use drone surveillance to find unregistered hives in public areas. So, before you buy anything, here's a serious question. Have you actually checked what your specific province or state requires? Or are you assuming this is simply a hobby nobody's tracking? And then there's the part almost none of the aspirational content shows you. What does the actual routine look like month to month once the hives are established? It's not passive. Every 7 to 10 days during the active season, you're opening the hive, checking for eggs, checking for signs of the queen, checking for disease, checking mite counts. Miss that rhythm for a few weeks and you can miss the exact window where a treatable problem becomes an unsalvageable one. Come autumn, you're making a judgment call that terrifies experienced beekeepers every single year. Does this colony have enough stored honey to survive winter, or do I need to feed them artificially to make up the difference? Get that wrong and you don't find out until spring, when you open the hive and find silence instead of a hum. So ask yourself, honestly, are you the kind of person who checks in on something consistently, every week for months at a time, even when nothing seems to be going wrong? Because that consistency is the actual skill this hobby demands, far more than any piece of equipment you could buy. Here's a question that separates the people who last in this hobby from the people who quietly give up after one bad winter. Are you prepared to lose a colony and try again? Or does one failure convince you the whole thing wasn't for you? Because loss isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, it's close to the baseline. Even the best, most experienced beekeepers in the country are losing close to 40% of their colonies most years. And in the worst recent years, well over half. If you go into this expecting every hive to survive every winter, you're setting yourself up to feel like a failure over something that happens to nearly everyone. But if you go in understanding that loss is part of the deal, and you build in the replacement costs, the extra colony, the financial cushion for a bad season, you're already ahead of most people who try this and quit. So let's come back to the real question underneath everything we've covered, the one that actually determines whether this becomes something you do for years, or something you try for one summer and abandon. It's not, can I afford a hive? Almost anyone can afford a hive. It's, am I willing to build the habits, the weekly checks, the treatment schedule, the honest acceptance of loss that keep a colony alive long enough to actually produce something? That's a completely different question, and it has almost nothing to do with how much you love the idea of your own honey label on a jar. Because here's the thing about that jar, that label, that quiet morning with the hum in front of you, it's real. People build genuinely meaningful, sometimes even profitable lives around this. It exists, and for the people who do it well, it's everything they hoped it would be. But it's not built by the person who fell in love with the picture of the finished honey. It's built by the person willing to ask the harder questions first, about mites, about winter, about the version of themselves that has to show up and check the hive on a random Tuesday in July, whether they feel like it or not. Anyone can order a package of bees. Keeping them alive, season after season, through the losses and the good years both, that's a completely different skill. And the only real question left is this. Are you ready to find out which kind of beekeeper you're actually going to be before you buy the hive, not after? If this changed how you think about the hive you've been picturing on your porch, that's what this channel is here for. Breaking down the real economics behind the hobbies and businesses everyone romanticizes. If you got something out of this, drop a like. It genuinely helps more people find it. And I want to know in the comments after everything we just covered, are you still in, or did the math change your mind? Subscribe if you're not already, because we're breaking down another one just like this next time. See you in the next one.